Reports are emerging of a potential new shootout involving federal agents in Minneapolis, alongside law enforcement, including ICE agents, right here in Minnesota. Just before 4:30 a.m. in Minneapolis, the city finally seemed to breathe. After 3 consecutive nights of unrest, sirens had quieted, smoke had dissipated, and the streets had settled into a precarious but heavy calm. Then, in a side corridor most residents had never noticed, a line of black SUVs arrived. No lights, no markings, and no public announcement. A joint federal team was operating under sealed warrants, and the urgency was clear. If an illicit transfer was already underway, daylight would be too late. Stay with us for the full context, timeline, and implications, as what unfolded in the following minutes reveals not only why federal investigators acted so swiftly, but also why this operation extended far beyond that initial door, uncovering a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the city. Welcome to Border Watch Daily, your source for in-depth analysis on the world's most significant events. Today, we're diving deep into an unprecedented federal investigation that uncovered a chilling truth, hidden within Minneapolis's darkest corners. The convoy stopped in front of a low, discreet building set back from the main road. A small sign near the entrance identified it as a private immigrant hotel, a temporary shelter for refugee families awaiting longer-term placement. The windows were dark, curtains drawn, and the entrance seemed ordinary enough to blend into a city that had looked away for days. Inside the vehicles were 320 tactical agents from the FBI and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They were positioned in silence, executing a meticulously timed plan. Warrants had been signed hours earlier, and instructions were precise. Enter quickly, secure the building, locate any vulnerable occupants, and preserve anything that could be moved or destroyed. A team leader checked his watch, spoke into his radio, and the orders spread down the line in short, precise words. A hydraulic ram struck the front doors, and the assault team forced their way inside. The building responded immediately. From the second-floor landing, flashes of gunfire broke the darkness in brief bursts. Guards armed with automatic rifles fired down a narrow corridor, forcing the federal team to hug the walls, clear corners, and advance in controlled stages. Boots pounded the stairs. Orders crackled over radios. In that confined space, every sound was amplified. The resistance didn't last long. Several defenders were neutralized before they could reload. Others dropped their weapons and retreated into locked rooms, only to be extracted moments later. In less than 3 minutes, the gunfire ceased, and the structure was under control. The question was no longer how fiercely the building would resist, but what it had been designed to protect. Floor by floor, teams moved towards the rooms. Many doors were not simply closed, they were locked from the outside, as if the rooms were used for storage rather than shelter. Agents cut the locks and forced open the first door. Inside were rows of beds arranged with an efficiency that spoke of procedure, not residential comfort. Several children lay in these beds, but they didn't stir despite the noise, lights, or movement in the corridor. Medical personnel attached to the operation intervened immediately. The children were unconscious and appeared to have been sedated. They were kept in place, silent, for reasons difficult to ignore. Then, a detail shifted the scene from alarming to undeniable. On their wrists, there were no names or admission bracelets, but inventory numbers written in dark marker. No family identifiers, no files taped to the wall, just repeated sequences across multiple rooms, suggesting the children were tracked as units, not as people. The implication was hard to miss. A place presented as a refuge was operating as a controlled detention center, and the numbering system implied a timeline extending beyond the building itself. At that moment, the raid took on another dimension. The task shifted from securing a violent location to mapping a network potentially already in motion. The floors were sealed as evidence. Medical teams began stabilizing the victims for transport, and investigators focused on the one question that couldn't wait for daylight. If these inventory numbers corresponded to a shipping plan, what was the next transfer point? And how far away was it? The 4:30 a.m. operation in Minneapolis did not occur in a vacuum. For 10 days, the city had endured a volatile period where every hour brought a new rumor, a new flashpoint, and a new demand for response. After a fatal shooting, public anger spilled into the streets, and confrontations escalated, drawing attention to the loudest intersections and the brightest flames. In public statements during the unrest, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar described the escalation as a necessary uprising to protect the community. To many residents, this sounded like a call for accountability. To investigators tracking patterns across the city, it also meant the next phase would likely consume police manpower, emergency services, and media attention, reducing visibility elsewhere. Records from those nights told a story in numbers. In 72 hours, police reports tallied over 430 violent incidents, including arsons, assaults, and coordinated blockades. Federal resources poured into Minneapolis, with approximately 10,000 federal agents deployed solely to maintain order, keep corridors open, and prevent unrest from spreading to other neighborhoods. From the outside, it appeared that the city was battling a single, real-time crisis. Within the federal task force, another timeline was taking shape. The chaos in the streets was not just a public confrontation. It functioned as cover. The disturbances drew officers to protests and away from quiet residential areas where inspections, routine patrols, and welfare checks would normally have occurred. Amidst the clamor, quiet places became invisible, and a network that thrived in darkness could move with less friction. Reports of missing children rapidly increased. Over 230 children were reported missing across Minneapolis. Families filed reports, posted photographs, and pleaded for follow-up. Names appeared on flyers and storefronts, then vanished under the next wave of breaking news. In the confusion, the city's capacity was dedicated to one emergency, while another developed behind closed doors. Investigators began treating the missing persons reports as a single, linked problem rather than isolated cases. The working theory was that a trafficking operation was using the unrest as a shield, with an estimated value of nearly $2 billion based on the scale of movement and early financial leads already surfacing. This theory raised an uncomfortable question. Who could operate for so long on this scale without inspections piercing the disguise? The trail led to Mayor Sophia Abdi Aden, a 2-year-old public official of Somali origin, hailed for years as a humanitarian symbol. Her administration funded housing programs. Her office promoted food aid. Her public image focused on assisting vulnerable families, especially newcomers. Yet, investigators identified hotels and shelters linked to shell corporations connected to individuals within her inner circle. During the unrest, these locations were overcrowded and effectively shielded from inspections by the pace of emergencies and the paperwork of temporary housing, granting the sites time and confidentiality. Acting against a sitting mayor during active unrest carried a real risk. Any action without solid evidence could have been perceived as politically motivated, and the streets might have erupted again. The task force needed irrefutable evidence that couldn't be dismissed as mere talking points. They needed to catch the network red-handed as it moved its most sensitive cargo. The breakthrough didn't come from street patrols, but from logistical surveillance near the waterfront. A shipping tracking team noticed an anomaly connected to the mayor's humanitarian footprint. 12 shipping containers, registered as humanitarian aid, clothing, and supplies, were scheduled to leave the port of Minneapolis in exactly 48 hours. On paper, the weight seemed incorrect for the declared cargo. On thermal scanners, heat signatures appeared where they shouldn't have, as if an occupied space had been concealed within the steel walls of the containers. For the task force, the timeline felt like a countdown. If those containers left the port, the investigation would cross a line far harder to reverse. And if the missing children were part of this movement plan, then the next transfer wasn't days away. It was already approaching. This violence was not random. It was deliberately structured. The task force commander made a choice that hinged as much on timing as on trust. He did not inform Municipal Police Command. He did not call City Hall. The team had already observed how quickly operational details leaked to the street during the unrest. The risk was simple. If the network had informants within the local response system, any alert would trigger an evacuation. Instead, the commander activated a specialized FBI unit focused on financial crimes and gave them a precise mission: find the pre-shipment payments linked to the 12 containers and find them fast. Within hours, the team traced a series of transfers that aligned with neither charitable logistics nor standard port fees. 6-figure bribes had been wired to port officials positioned to bypass the final inspection lane, and the payment timestamps matched the departure window, now less than 48 hours away. This confirmation changed the operation's pace. It meant the network wasn't merely harboring missing children, waiting for the riots to subside. It was executing a movement plan with a fixed timetable and paying to ensure no one would look inside those steel walls supposedly containing donated supplies. Upstairs, tactical agents continued to search the building room by room, stabilizing victims and seizing weapons and phones as evidence. Downstairs, a separate evidence collection unit located the hidden basement entrance and entered under controlled lighting. What they found was inconsistent with the temporary housing administration. The space had been converted into an improvised sterile medical facility, complete with gurneys, surgical lights, and refrigeration units, adjacent to a small office within that basement. A laptop lay open, as if someone had stepped away mid-task. On the screen was a spreadsheet, but it wasn't a guest list or an admission ledger. It read like an inventory. Entries were organized as requests for parts matched with quantities, deadlines, and destination notes that had no place in any humanitarian program. Investigators compared the file's numbering system to that inscribed on the children's wrists upstairs, and the match was immediate. At that moment, the inventory numbers ceased being a strange detail and became a tracking system. The spreadsheet suggested the network was tagging children to fulfill specific demands from foreign buyers. Previous intelligence regarding corneal trafficking was no longer an abstract rumor or a vague warning. In the file, they appeared as a series of items with prices and planning markers, enough to indicate a market that treated human lives as cargo. Even with this evidence, the case still had a missing piece. Mayor Sophia Abdi Aden was not in the building. Her official schedule placed her at an emergency command center coordinating riot response, but surveillance teams tracking her communications believed this was inaccurate. The commander needed her location before the next phase began, because if the network was already paying bribes and working with a departure countdown, leadership would likely attempt to erase the chain of evidence. At that precise moment, A dirt box surveillance aircraft flying at 6,100 meters altitude picked up a signal. The mayor's personal encrypted phone pinged a cell tower near the industrial waterfront, several kilometers from City Hall. The task force did not interpret this as a routine movement. It looked like a move, and a move at this hour almost always meant a plan was being executed. The commander treated it as an emergency protocol. If the network believed the hotel had been compromised, it would attempt to liquidate evidence, move remaining victims, and push the containers to the docks before investigators could seal the port. The operation was now split into two races: locate the 12 containers and prevent their departure, and locate the mayor before the command structure vanished into the same labyrinth. The labyrinth was real. The port of Minneapolis housed thousands of containers stacked in steel alleys that looked identical from the ground. Finding 12 specific boxes in that field, while the city was still unstable and roads were congested, wasn't just difficult. It was almost impossible without a pattern. Investigators reviewed how the network had moved during the riots. Humanitarian aid trucks had been used to pass through police checkpoints with minimal scrutiny, as few officers wanted to be seen delaying supplies during a crisis. The task force also noted that the mayor's public charity work relied on a specific logistics company, a predictable route, and a consistent set of handlers. So, instead of chasing container numbers one by one, they tracked behavior. Through pattern-of-life analysis, the team replayed satellite imagery of the port from the past 48 hours. They tracked the same truck shapes, the same parking lane, and the same time windows that appeared whenever aid shipments moved in and out. Then, they noticed a subtle anomaly. 12 containers had been moved from the normal flow and parked in a dead zone, an area without security cameras and no active cranes, a blind spot created by the very infrastructure of the port. It was a hiding place, but it also looked like a launch point. The commander understood what this meant. If the containers were in the blind spot, the network could load them without creating a digital trace, and if a ship was already waiting, departure could occur long before morning. A surveillance drone was redirected to the dead zone. Minutes later, the video feed changed the entire equation. A crane was active. The network wasn't waiting for the day shift. Loading had begun. As tactical teams rushed towards the port of Minneapolis, the drone feed remained locked on the dead zone. A crane was in motion. A Panamanian-flagged cargo ship was docked at the pier. The network wasn't waiting for morning. The convoy was 6 minutes away. On the dock, the first container, labeled as aid supplies, was already being lifted. The task force commander focused on a problem beyond speed. If the container touched the ship's deck, the situation could turn into a legal standoff that would take time to unravel. Time was the one resource the children inside did not have. He issued a simple order: breach the perimeter, stop the lift, and secure the cargo. The lead armored vehicle crashed through the chain-link gate at 96 kilometers per hour, opening a breach wide enough for the convoy to surge through. Agents dispersed among the steel stacks, moving to control the crane, the ship's access points, and the truck lanes that could move the remaining containers. AK-9 unit swept the doors of the nearest container and alerted immediately. It wasn't signaling people, but narcotics. In seconds, the operation acquired a second layer of urgency. Children were being used as a shield to deter inspection, while a cargo of narcotics moved within the same steel box. The crane operator understood the same logic. If the cargo reached the hold, it could disappear inside the ship, and any delay in access could become lethal. As agents closed in, the operator attempted to solve the problem by force. The 2-meter-long container swung over the ship's open hatch, approximately 6 meters above the deck, swaying on its cables like a pendulum. Inside were 20 sedated children, and behind the false partition, a cargo that could harm anyone who mishandled it. The commander needed the crane stopped now. A sniper team, positioned on the roof of the Port Authority building, had a clear shot at the machine's hydraulic systems. A single shot rang out. The bullet struck the hydraulic manifold on the crane's main arm. Fluid spewed, the arm shuddered, and the crane halted with a groan. The container froze above the hatch, oscillating in the last seconds of its momentum. Agents rushed to the control cabin, cut the power, and secured the operator before he could try again. The lift was stopped, but the question remained: what exactly was sealed inside that container, and how many others were already positioned to be moved? With the crane disabled, agents cut the power and guided the cargo to the asphalt. A thermal lens opened the locking bars, and the doors revealed boxes of humanitarian rice stacked as cover. Behind a false partition, 20 children were settled in modified bunks, unconscious and sedated for transit, while bricks of narcotics were packed into the remaining space. In a single steel box, humanitarian aid labeling sat alongside contraband, an arrangement designed to turn scrutiny into hesitation. By sunrise, the port was under full federal lockdown. Floodlights swept across rows of containers as teams moved aisle by aisle, confirming seals, photographing serial numbers, and recovering documents before they could disappear. All 12 containers linked to the departure plan were intercepted before leaving the dock. The totals confirmed the scale. 3 tons of narcotics, including 70 kilograms of fentanyl, 400 kilograms of methamphetamine, and 800 kilograms of black heroin, were recovered from the entire shipment. Simultaneously, medical teams transported victims to secure trauma centers, and 200 children were rescued from the hotel and port combined, many requiring urgent care after prolonged sedation. Inside the hotel, evidence teams compared basement records to the spreadsheet inventory, including notes that matched intelligence on corneal trafficking. Medical files showed surgical marks and selection notes indicating donors had been assigned to buyers in 5 different countries. Room logs, wrist tags, and shipping documents formed a single chain connecting a local concealment site to an exit route. The final arrest unfolded on a highway leading out of Minneapolis. 3 FBI pursuit units surrounded Mayor Sophia Abdi Aden's official SUV. Agents found her deleting files from an encrypted tablet, and she was arrested on charges including human trafficking, narcotics conspiracy, and money laundering. Then the city's story shifted. The National Guard was recalled. Streets quieted, and protest corridors emptied as families began the long work of reunification. Over the next 48 hours, forensic accountants identified 47 shell corporations disguised as charitable organizations, including the Somali Relief Fund, the Migrant Housing Initiative, and Minneapolis Youth Action. Funds flowed through banks in Dubai and the Cayman Islands before returning to finance the shipments, and investigators estimated the fraud at $4 billion as the case expanded to a list of 23 indicted officials. This report is presented for informational and educational purposes. It does not glorify violence or criminal activity in any way. Its objective is to examine how complex investigations unfold, how institutions respond under pressure, and why transparency remains essential to justice.